Hi, this is Tim Fancher, founder of Psalm 144 Church Protection Seminars, and I'm delighted to once again be joined with Pastor KJ of New Beginnings Church in downtown Tulsa, and with Brent Crittenden.
Crittenden.
I'm almost there. I'll get it by the third or fourth time. He is our firearms expert, over 30 years experience in law enforcement. He has trained everyone from civilians to federal agents that are in the thousands over his many years. So he's part of the remarkable team that we have here at Psalm 144. And our job is to go into small and medium-sized churches and help them to implement the proper people and procedures to put a church protection team in place. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is to really focus on Pastor KJ is one thing that we work on is church flow. And for someone who doesn't know what church flow is, first from a pastor's point of view, what do we mean when we're talking about church flow, Pastor?
Okay, so with church flow, every church has their own flow, with meaning of their mode of operation, how service flows, how how the people are moving on the campus, on the property, all the different the subtle things that are happening behind the scenes, from the worship team to the nursery team to the children's team to the kitchen team, hospitality teams, all these teams. So church flow is all about all the things that are happening on in a worship encounter or a Sunday morning service, with all the different parts of the body functioning together. And so it's a very important thing, because I can tell you honestly, from my perspective, that was one of my main concerns, was like, okay, so if we get some church protection operating on a Sunday morning, how is that going to disrupt the flow? Because you don't want to disrupt the flow. You want people coming in to feel as natural as possible. You want to have a commanding presence, but you don't want to draw unnecessary attention like something is wrong. Right. And so I know, just from a pastoral concern, that was something that was an apprehension that I had, even going into trying to figure out how to get this done. I was like, how am I going to do this in a way that doesn't freak people out?
Right.
Because that's the concern.
Well, what's interesting is, my background is kind of unique, but I'm an ORU seminary grad, but my background is law enforcement and security and street self-defense. And it's interesting to me, and Brent can speak to this, the different terms that sound so radically different than the same, because we talk about church flow in seminary and in churches, but in law enforcement and security, we talk about things like danger leaks, and we talk and then in my undergrad, I studied sociology, and in sociology it's mores and norms, and it's basically it's all these different terms for what comes down to just what's normal, what's regular normal behavior. In law enforcement and security, danger leaks are teaching someone how to recognize if someone might be up to something, because people tend to forecast it without even realizing it. So those are the things that we really do have to be mindful of, and it's interesting to hear you speak of that. And in a moment, I'll pull you into this, Brent, but one thing I just wanted to start off with asking. We're now about 3 weeks since I gave the first big 144 church protection seminar here. We've had the church protection team in place for 3 Sundays now, right. And the first time I was very active and I was overseeing it. The second time I stepped back a little bit, and by the third time I was just here if they needed me. So I've been loosening up the reins. I've been watching them. I'm curious, as a pastor, what has it been like for you from up here on a Sunday morning, all the way to running out there and checking on the kids, all the many hats that a pastor has to wear on a Sunday morning? What has it been like for you? What are some of your thoughts and observations, and how has it affected church flow, good or bad? Okay, absolutely. So I would say, to give it to you in one word, I'd say peace of mind. It's just peace, but I would just add of mind, because again, as I've mentioned before, we want to make sure as a pastor that your sheep are having the greatest experience when they're coming and they're setting aside this holy time in their family worship. And so to know that if you have volunteers outside, that they're covered. To know when you have volunteers inside in the first entry point, the volunteers can serve and they're covered. To know that when we have people and volunteers serving, and you have ushers and greeters in place, and we're in here, service is going on, that there's somebody watching, we're covered. To know that there's somebody that's watching over everybody. It just brings a peace of mind of knowing that, okay, as a pastor, I can focus in on what I'm supposed to be doing in the moment that I'm supposed to be doing it, and that there are other eyes that are watching over the things that I can't see, because we can't be everywhere at the same time, obviously. But to have teams and people in place that are watching, it brings that peace of mind, and it hasn't disrupted the flow. I think, if anything, some people they may come and they may look around and they're like, oh, I wonder what these guys are doing, but they wonder,
but the people that are in place and they're doing their job, and so it's not a disruption. But I do believe, as in our church, from even talking to people, people are they feel a sense of peace of knowing that we are covering them, because we've been very public and vocal about saying, look, we are putting systems in place so that you don't have to worry about a thing.
Right.
It's not that something is going to happen. We pray that nothing ever will happen, but if something does happen, we are prepared. You don't have to worry about it. You've got a team that's been trained and equipped, so everybody can kind of exhale and just worship the Lord and enjoy their time that they have to fellowship and be together.
Absolutely, and and that's one of the things that you clued in on so quickly, and that's something that Brensky will speak on in a moment, is just that we're being proactive, not reactive.
Absolutely.
And that's something for pastors to be mindful of whenever they're first speaking. They're speaking to the congregation about some of the things that are going to be happening. And just off camera, Brent, you were just talking to us about some things that we have to be mindful of, because my point of view is, as I'm putting the people and procedures in place, what my expertise is in teaching how to recognize predatory behavior, how to deal with it, how to physically get someone up, remove them, how to talk people down, de-escalation, that sort of thing. You're very well rounded, of course, but your main specialty is firearms and firearm instruction. But one of the things that you were talking about a little bit was being mindful of when we're talking about zones, and we're talking about where the children are located. So what are some of the things that you talk to churches when you come in about to be mindful of on if heaven forbid firearms do come into play? What are some things that you like to let them know to be thoughtful about?
Well, we want to discuss with each church is going to be different. Mm-hmm. Are we going to be in a full lockdown mode during services, or are we going to have the doors open? Obviously we want to keep our doors open. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. We're here for the public to come in and hear the word. And one thing I was thinking, that this team's in place, it allows the word just to flow through you, because you don't have to worry about it.
Absolutely.
The flock is protected, and we're out here. But in firearms is our last resort.
Right.
That's when all else has failed. That's the last thing. We don't want to use firearms. But if we have to, that's the last resort. Mm-hmm. And if we do, we're going to have to be mindful of our surroundings. Where's our babies? Where's our nursery? Is our elders meeting behind this wall? Is the youth church going on over here? Each church is going to have its own unique set of facts and circumstances, and each church is going to be unique on how it's going to have to be handled. Because we have to realize that if we do have to engage in firearms, that bullets travel through walls, and sometimes they miss and they don't stop, and we have to keep that in mind, that could happen. So each individual church is going to be its own unique plan and setup and design on where people are stationed, where we have our greeters, where we have our safety point man on each corner, or however we want to deal with it. And communication is the main thing that you got to establish some type of communication, and it can't be by text messaging or cell phone. It's going to have to be immediate.
Right.
So you're going to have to engage in some type of a radio communication to where the guys can communicate, know what's going on, and keep each other advised, and a way to also communicate with the pastor. If we'll have, I've met with some churches where we have some lights on the back wall, where if you're at the pulpit, you could see the different lights come on, and maybe a different colored light is a different meaning. Mm-hmm. We have one that we need to be aware a little bit, and one, it's take cover. Maybe even like a tornado drill. Being from Oklahoma, we know how to do that.
Exactly.
So each case is going to be individual, and it's going to be based upon the totality and looking at the design and what we want to accomplish in that church.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important. And in our first, and to me that tied into our first discussion, you talked about church security seeming like such a big monster, but now you can see how you break it into chunks. And I think what's really important when we're talking about something like this is that it's that same thing of not to get overwhelmed, because all that can sound incredibly scary. But what's going through my mind as we talk about this is one thing, and this is something we were discussing this morning and getting ready, is having those pretty frequent meetings between the church protection team and church staff to have that proper communication. one of the things that I teach in the seminars is radio discipline and how to communicate and how to simply break things into zones. And I'm not going to say what it is on camera because it's something that that is specific to this church, but you well know what it means.
Right.
That there's a certain signal
Right.
that you cannot miss, and
Right.
you know that means we're on lockdown. And so we implement these things where there's no question about if he's doing that, it's lockdown time. But as a pastor, though, you know, one thing we've talked about having the crisis rehearsal and going through that. What are your thoughts on just what he said and to say if you come to me and ask that, well, how in the world are we can't come in here and actually shoot up the church, so how are we going to do that? What I would say is by having conversations about it, we're on that proper path, and you can do some simulated training. So is that something that you think as a pastor is something that's going to be off-putting to people, or if that's something that you just see as another element that's manageable, that again isn't going to disrupt church flow by having that added layer of meetings and training sessions?
Well, I think you're gonna run into you're gonna run into one camp that's gonna be much like you've talked about before in the past, that we're just gonna pray and just let God handle it. So we're not gonna do anything. We're not gonna simulate. But then you'll run into those who will say, hey, you know what? Yeah, a run through is good. And I'm personally of the notion that, you know, there is no fear when you are prepared. Mm-hmm. When your response has already been determined, you don't have to worry about anything. I mean, you just think about Job and, you know, things that Job went through. Job was only tested in the area where he didn't have faith. And so when, you know, the areas that I'm prepared, you know, I'm not worried about being tested about if someone comes in here and we have an active shooter situation. If I've already run through an active shooter scenario, not that anything can prepare you for that moment and what you'll feel, but I don't want to be learning about how to respond when it's happening.
Right.
Just like I don't want to learn how to respond to a tornado when it's happening. I mean, my house is already prepared. I already have our safe place. Our kids know where to go. We've already got, you know, things set up. We've got food. We've got water. We've got flashlights. We've got everything in. So I don't worry about tornadoes. When the sirens go off, we go to the room. We already know what to do. It's not a stressor for me. So I'm of the notion, and I think the conversations that pastors need to continue to have with their flocks and with their sheep is keep church protection at the forefront of their mind, not to scare them, but to inform them.
Right.
I think a drill, would be helpful.
Right.
If I think there's several ways that it can be done, so that you're not freaking out someone who might be a guest on that Sunday. It might be that, hey, you know, church, we're going to do breakfast, you know, 30 minutes before service, 15 minutes or 10 minutes before normal start time. We're going to go in there, have some music playing, and just run through a mock scenario. I think there's ways that a pastor can set it up, and I don't think people, if it's presented right, I don't think the flock will be off put by it, but I would think at their core that they would appreciate it, because they're thinking about us and they're thinking about our family.
And I think that's key. And, you know, we talked about balance, and I also think it's just also about perception, because I can't imagine a single church being upset if someone came in as a visitor and, oh, they're running a tornado drill today. I'm a visitor,
Right.
but, hey, they're running a tornado drill. Okay, great. And do you want me to be a part of this, or do I stand back? It'd probably be my only question. I can't imagine someone getting upset. Right. So why would someone get upset about the same church doing a drill for an active shooter? Or, you know, what we talk about is people tend to go to the extravagant. They tend to go to, what about a coordinated terrorist attack? What about a mass shooter? Well, okay, but what about some of the things that churches face every single Sunday of custodial issues, of stalkers? And, you know, and that's one thing is a woman can leave the boyfriend or the husband, put all these different blocks and barriers in place, but he knows every Sunday she's going to be at XY church at 10:30. That is what's known in our world as a soft target. And that's what we're doing, is we're making this a hard target. We're hardening it. So, you know, so that's a reality. That's the sort of thing that pastors face, and I know you have faced that before. Right.
Right.
And so that's the thing I think for pastors to really be mindful of, is doing a drill for a tornado is in the exact same category as doing a drill for an active shooter. It's just that. It's about protecting the flock, like
Absolutely.
you said. And Brent, I mean, to go ahead and start to begin to wrap this up, what would be just kind of some of your final thoughts on with your experience for the pastors who are just, you know, what's the one or two things you like to let people know about bringing firearms into church in order to make people safe? What are the things that you can do to help make them to not feel so afraid and, I think, intimidated by the unknown world of firearms?
Well, first of all, today's modern firearms are safe. It's a weapon that's used. It takes a a definite trigger pull for a gun to go off with today's firearms. Safety is first, and we go back to the scenario and the training procedures. That's exactly the same way that I've trained police officers for my whole career. Is we create a situation that is as realistic as we can make it, and we run them through that situation. So when it happens, we don't have that split second to stop and think, "What do I do now?" Because we know what to do, because those neural pathways in the brain has already been created and are there, and they know how to respond and react whenever that time comes. Hopefully it never will, but if it does, they're trained. That's why we train like we practice, like we play.
Right.
So, but safety's not a concern, and there's probably, well, let me back up here. I know you have that element of society that I've dealt with, that they say guns are evil, and they don't understand that I can bring evil into a church by meaning a gun. And I've actually been confronted with this, and I tell this person, a gun is no more evil than a truck. Look what they used in France.
Right.
Used a truck as a weapon.
Right.
It's a tool. A gun is simply a tool that you put on your belt, and you use it as a tool whenever you need it. It's not evil. I've had the media contacted me when I first started doing church training, and I had a specific reporter from a liberal news organization, and he was wanting to know, how can I take evil guns into a church? And I informed him, my guns are all good Christian guns. My guns get locked up in the gun safe every night. They spend the night there. My guns don't hurt nobody. They don't rob anybody.
Right.
They're good guns. And that's what we have to get past, I think, sometimes, is the mentality of people. And people don't understand that there are more guns in America than there has been ever.
Right.
And there's actually less gun violence.
Right.
And the media don't tell us that, because our bad guys are becoming more and more aware that there's a lot more good guys out here than get with guns now.
Absolutely. Well, very well said. And just to go ahead and wrap this up, Pastor KJ, just as a pastor with the experience that you have, you have your successful non-for-profit, you're a church planter, so it's not that you're just with one church. I mean, you are so involved with so many church organizations, so many churches. You're extraordinarily experienced. So from that experience, what are some of your final concluding thoughts? Again, I think that one of the best things we can do is to help pastors overcome that fear, and help them to teach their congregation how to overcome that fear if we are looking at firearms. So just after this, what are some of your final thoughts for them?
I think, in my mind, as I, prior to meeting you and going through this experience, in my mind, I viewed church security, church protection. I viewed it from a perspective of having like a police officer standing at your door of your church. And in my mind, I would see that police officer standing there in their garb and with their weapon at their hip. And then I envisioned people pulling into the church parking lot, and just kind of the apprehension that they would have if they were ever even going to walk through the door, because of having the police officer presence. I just assumed would be very off-putting to them. But now, having gone through this, and what I love about what Psalms 144 is doing, it's empowering the people and the volunteers in the church. So if Brent and I have been going to church together, and I see him on the church protection team, and I see him armed, but I know his heart.
Right.
I know that he is there to protect me and my family.
Yes.
The perception changes. So when I see him there, and I see, I think everybody has there's this natural innate fear of guns.
Right.
And when someone has one, I think that's a natural thing, and I think that's a good thing. But when it's somebody that is within the body, within the context of our congregation, within our own fellowship, I think that changes it. And it makes the perception go from
Fear to respect.
Fear to respect, yes. And then I know that there's a safety concern. And so I would just say, for me that this whole transition, this whole experience, this whole church protection, it's just another equipping of the body of Christ. Just like we have ushers, just like we have greeters, we have nursery workers. It's the next contextualization that the church has to go through to be a 21st century church in America. Many churches around the world already have to wrestle with this issue. We've not had to wrestle with this issue, and so I do believe that that we need to wake up before it's too late and we are finding ourselves in a reactive position. I think that now is the time for everyone to begin to take the steps necessary.
Absolutely. And, and one thing I can't but think of is in addition to ministry, you're a successful businessman, and I know you've heard the term in business of let's get out ahead of this thing.
Absolutely.
And and that's how I see what we're doing here
Absolutely.
today. Is let's get out ahead of this thing.
Absolutely.
I really think that's the direction that we're going. Well, for everyone, I'd just like to thank you for watching this video, and surely it's been informative for you. I'd like to thank these men, Pastor KJ of New Beginnings Church in downtown Tulsa, to Brent for all of his work, and you can contact any of us individually through our bio page. Earlier, Brent was speaking about some of the different misperceptions that are put out there. We are building a very comprehensive library, so please make sure and check out our resources page. There's custom articles in addition to the videos, and we'll be linking to credible statistics and sites and stats on firearms, on street self-defense training, on everything that you need to know to take your church to that elite level, which is the whole reason that Psalm 144 exists. So thank you all so much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
and
you.
God bless
Thank
all
you.
of you.